Ladies and gentlemen, a very special guest today. We have Jake Woodhouse. He is the founding team member of the Bitcoin Advisor, had this brilliant podcast, Bitcoin with Jake, which has led to some amazing conversations and opportunities. Jake, such a pleasure to have you on, sir. How are you today, mate?
I'm very good, Sean. Thank you for having me along.
In January 2009, you said goodbye to your father, and you now pay respect to his passing by crediting that date as the start of your Bitcoin journey. Firstly, I do wish to pass on my condolences. Jake, this is a pretty pivotal life event in anyone's life, but what is the relationship between crypto and your dad here?
Wow, Sean, it's a big question, isn't it? It's made my heart go a little bit flustery. Thank you very much for asking such a to-the-point question and difficult question. So, the relationship between my father and crypto, I guess the first distinction I would make from that question is I actually draw a serious line between Bitcoin and the rest of crypto. And that is a question we can delve into later along the conversation. But my father died just very suddenly, had a heart attack. I got a bunch of missed calls from my mum on New Year's Day. I'd been smoking weed at my friend's house and had a huge night out the night before. The last thing I want to do was talk to mum, let alone, boom, you got to come home, your father's died. It's a fucking crazy day. I was 20 years old. Anyway, my father was a wealthy guy, and we owned a beautiful property in the south of the UK that within 18 months of his death, we decided to sell. Now, I'm the eldest son, so it was due to be passed to me. But we decided that it wasn't the right fit for us to remain living there, and I didn't want my mother in his tomb forever. She was only 48. She needed to try and move on, and as did my brother and sister and I. So we sold, and with that, I inherited money. So in my mid-20s, I had to try and work out, what do you do with money? I knew that I wanted to be conservative with it. I knew that I wanted to be able to pass it to my kids if I ever had any. And so I had a big challenge, essentially, which is, don't fuck this up. Find a suitable way of protecting your wealth for the long term. And it took me on this huge journey. And it's ongoing. It's still not closed as of today. But the long story short is that everything takes you to Bitcoin. And no, it's not the wider crypto market. I've played around in that myself already. For truly long-term wealth protection, I believe Bitcoin is the best tool. I'm always happy to explain to people what I've done in terms of my decision-making, the good and the bad. I would never recommend anything to anyone necessarily, just what has been successful for me. And so owning Bitcoin in self-custody, it's an incredibly peaceful place versus having money in the equity market or the bond market or in real estate or in some more speculative type of investments like angel investments, so private equity deals and early stage companies, so startups, or even crypto tokens. There's a huge array of different assets you can own. And I believe Bitcoin is the one that should be the majority of your portfolio for the average person and the average family. So yes, shout out to Dad, long gone now, miss you loads. That was the day that I had to start learning about wealth protection, and that's what brings me to the conversation.
In 2009, was it straight into Bitcoin, or there's that lapse of 6 years and there's other things in between?
So, as you know, Bitcoin itself really only started in 2009. So, no, frankly, it wasn't part of my investment portfolio at the time. I bought my first Bitcoin in 2015. So roughly December of 2015, I bought, a little over 10 coins. It was around 400 Singaporean dollars. I was based in Singapore at the time. So it's about 350 US dollars a coin. And that's when I bought my first Bitcoin, was back then. So I was learning about blockchain. I was learning about separating money from state, but I hadn't necessarily understood the importance of Bitcoin specifically at that time. And of my net wealth, it would have been sub 1% of what I owned. So it was a tiny portion of my allocation, shall we say. The change from 2015 to 2023 is quite extraordinary, and now probably half my net wealth is Bitcoin. And of the assets that I have available to actually buy anything with, i.e. liquid assets, I'm about 90% Bitcoin. So I love the question. Ask a man what he owns, not what he thinks. And you get much better answers in terms of what might be useful for yourself than saying, oh, I think bonds are a good play right now. Okay, well, how many bonds do you own? None. All right. You know what I mean? So yeah, so Bitcoin is, I call it the kind of the Bitcoin mind share. So 2015, I was thinking about Bitcoin a bit, but it was about, maybe 5% of my professional interests. By 2023, it's now 95% of my professional interests. And with that, my portfolio has changed.
One of the things that I heard on another podcast that you did, Jake, is you liquidated all your real estate to be able to go into Bitcoin as well. So are you totally out of bricks and mortar? And that side of that asset investing spectrum has all gone into Bitcoin. Are you still hold a couple of parcels of real estate?
No, great question. So I don't own any real estate any longer, like full stop. So I have 2 kids and a wife, and we rent for the very simple reason that the potential upside of Bitcoin, combined with its superior property rights, in my opinion, are the best place to store the majority of your wealth. Owning a highly leveraged mortgage with a physical piece of real estate is a completely inferior savings technology. And so once you get closer to Bitcoin and you figure out that actually you are not backing the fastest horse over the next 5 to 10 years by not owning Bitcoin, you've got to work out, well, hang on, if I keep my 100 grand or whatever it might be in this property, this equity position, what is the opportunity cost of not having it in Bitcoin? And the answer is, multiples of 2, 5, 10, even maybe over a long enough time horizon, which means why would you own any real estate? So it takes time. It took me the best part of 2 years to sell the real estate that I owned. I basically was overvaluing it in my mind. And the reality was the prices weren't what I was expecting. And so I took in 2015, it would have been as well, probably. When would this have been? So about 10 years ago, when I inherited my money, I took a very simple strategy, which was 50% is going to go into physical real estate and 50% is going to go into a wealth advisor who was going to spread my wealth across public markets using a pretty simple, 60-40 equities bond portfolio. And I now no longer own any of that. And I own 90% Bitcoin, 10% cash. So I think I can outperform all those other asset classes in quite a substantial way by owning Bitcoin. But equally, once you get closer to Bitcoin, you realize that it has a totally different sense of ownership. And if you own the keys to a self-custody wallet, you're the only person in the world that can move that. End of story. We saw with the Canadian truckers last year, you can be in a supposedly liberal Western democracy. You say something the government doesn't like, freeze your bank account. Or if you own government bonds, the Russians, for example, they had all of their foreign reserves just taken. And it doesn't make any sense to have any value in this traditional system when there's another alternative that has better upside and better property rights. So for me, it was a very simple calculation. I must caveat that, however, with I've had a number of teething problems being in a rental property with my wife and 2 kids that are the negative externalities of not owning the property that you're in. We've had a number of disagreements with the landlord and the property's not been what we expected to be paying for. And those have problems in itself. And every 12 months, you've got to look at moving. So there are value in owning a family home. And if Bitcoin does what I expect over the next kind of 2 to 3 years, I will certainly be selling some to try and buy a family home, which I think, aside from Bitcoin, is probably the most valuable thing I could own.
Say Bitcoin didn't exist now, but everything that you know about sound money, would you be a gold advocate, or you wouldn't think about gold at all and you'd go to something else if Bitcoin wasn't in this equation?
Wow, good question. Sound money. I mean, this is a fascinating subject in itself. What is sound money? Hard money. I spent many years going through education, ended up at a business school, did a business management degree. And I always say the same, or I now observe the same thing. I was taught how to make money. I was never taught how to ask what is money. And it's fascinating, that distinction, right? Why was I never asking the question, well, what is money? Now, it turns out that there's a a huge amount of work that's gone into understanding what money is, and there's a certain type of characteristic for what makes the most saleable good, and this idea of solving the double coincidence of wants problem, and how we transferred from a barter economy up to a trading system, and how important money is as a form of language, and what happens when the money gets corrupted, and how language then gets corrupted, and how the entire society that we live in is in some way under threat because of the technology we use as a facilitator of trade. It's a massive subject. It covers human rights. It covers economics. It covers different technology patterns. It's fascinating. So when you understand that sound money is the most it's the highest form of money that anyone can own in the marketplace, then you're always going to look for it. So if Bitcoin didn't exist, having asked the question, well, what is money? I would certainly be looking for the soundest type of money I could find to store value in over time. So if gold was that option, sure, I'd choose gold. If silver was that option, sure, I'd choose silver. The reason that those commodity monies were powerful over time was because of the characteristics that they attain, things like scarcity. So you start looking for things that are scarce, but actually needs to be portable, or it needs to be divisible, or it needs to be fungible. There's all these different elements that you can draw together to realize this is a good money, this is a bad money. And investing and saving are different things. They're not synonymous. And the modern fiat currency world has led us to believe that like you can't save. Saving's not useful, it's not helpful, and there's no point doing it. You just should invest. And they never tell you that actually saving is A, possible, but B, useful. And C, investing is risky. The moment you make an investment, you could lose everything. They don't tell you that. And so, yes, I might choose gold if that was what I saw as the best sound money option. But yeah, Bitcoin exists, thankfully, and Bitcoin is a 10x on what gold represents, and gold is actually a heavily manipulated market
Yeah.
in hindsight. So, it's a good thought exercise. I enjoyed that.
Talking about manipulated markets and gold in particular, BlackRock's obviously put in for this ETF. BlackRock is probably the biggest manipulator of gold through their gold ETFs, with paper gold being out there. In your opinion, caveat it any way you'd like, for everyone watching this video is not financial advice. Do you believe this BlackRock coming into the market is a good thing long term for Bitcoin, or is it nuanced? What would your take be on as this unfolds?
Well, I think first and foremost, like no news is bad news. So the Bitcoin brand is already probably one of the strongest brands in the world. Like the more people say the word Bitcoin, the better it is, because it's part of the human psyche. It's part of conversation. So it could be a BlackRock ETF for Bitcoin. It could be, the Federal Reserve comes out with some kind of Bitcoin-backed digital currency. It honestly doesn't matter what it is. If Bitcoin's in the news, that's a good thing, because people start to take notice of it more. The more they look at it, the more familiar they come with it. And there's something called the Lindy effect, which is a pretty interesting kind of strategic phenomenon for technology, where over a 20-year period, the average population member realizes that this thing's just not going away, essentially. So initially you have the early adopters that come in that really push something and believe in it. Then you've got the middle and then the laggards. And essentially there's a tipping point at which the general population realizes that this technology is not going anywhere. So you can think of it in the relation of like mobile phones, initially huge like building blocks on people's ears. And everyone's like, those are fucking ridiculous. We'll never use them. And then before you know it, everyone has 2 or 3 of these handheld computers in their pocket. There was a point at which the Lindy was reached, and it's just widely accepted this is a technology that's here to stay. And Bitcoin's the same. So at some point, the average population member is going to go, this thing's not going to disappear. And they'll probably then embrace it. So the question is then, well, how long is that from today?
Yeah.
The Bitcoin ETF with BlackRock specifically is interesting for a number of reasons. One is watching BlackRock operate in public versus in private, and their obvious relationship with the Securities Commission in America, and the news that comes out, BlackRock's filing wasn't quite correct. They're not going to, they're going to fail it. And then suddenly, like BlackRock have slightly changed it. And they're obviously like great friends, right? They've been doing business together for years, and it's a scratch my back, scratch your back scenario. some of the things that scare me about it are basically this suppressing of supply, so a suppressing of demand. Sorry, if a institutional investor says, right, here's 100 million buy Bitcoin, and BlackRock sells them what they think is $100 million worth of Bitcoin, but they take that money and they just don't buy physical Bitcoin with it. It goes somewhere else, and this is what we've seen happen with the likes of FTX and all these other kind of scam platforms, Celsius, etc., that are rehypothecating assets and doing all sorts of risky things on the back end. BlackRock, in theory, should behave more appropriately than that and is regulated, but you just don't know. And so when there's a large amount of a paper version of a specific product, then the price can be manipulated. So I don't know what that actually means in reality, but it's something to certainly consider. When I own Bitcoin in a self-custody wallet of my own, I have a bearer asset. So I don't give a shit what happens. In some ways, you're in this kind of incredibly peaceful Zen environment where like no one can take this stuff off you. You can't send it anywhere unless you say so, and you couldn't actually care less if an ETF was filed or not. But I do think it's interesting that there's a huge amount of money out there, like hundreds of trillions of money, that's managed by professional advisors that have regulatory moats. And the moment that that moat is crossed with something like an ETF, that basically means they can recommend it to their customers, it just means the price is going to go up. I couldn't say by how much, but it's very interesting to follow and see how it plays out.
I think the timing of it, they couldn't have made it any better. A few months before the Bitcoin halving, they announced it the week of the SEC going after Binance and Coinbase there as well. So, like you're saying, I think they probably are pretty close with the SEC. And it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. You've got a new role now with the Bitcoin Advisor, and you're part of the founding team. I really want to dive into that. But first, I just want to get your story and what led you there.
Yeah, great question, Sean. Thank you. So, well, I like telling a good story, don't worry, and we'll get there in the end. So, I guess it was around 2020, and a couple of things happened, but basically the Bitcoin rabbit hole just opened up real big, and I just dove down it like there was nothing I've ever researched more than Bitcoin. And so since I started looking into it, I was saving all of the content I consumed. So on bitcoinwithjake.com, you can listen, read, and watch all of the content that I found impactful during my research process. And I couldn't tell you how many hundreds of hours are linked there now, but it's well over 500, and it's probably closer to 1,000 now. That doesn't include my own podcasts and my own newsletter and whatever else. So, a lot of time has gone into researching this, but ultimately I saw a YouTube video in October of 2020 that was Michael Saylor, Bitcoin infiltrates corporate America. And Raoul Pal was interviewing him, and this guy's a rocket scientist, and then he becomes an entrepreneur, and then he lists his company on NASDAQ, and then he goes and buys $250 million worth of Bitcoin and calls it a treasury reserve asset. And it's like, what the fuck? Is he serious? Yeah, the way he described his situation was, how do I know that the manager of my business 100 years from now has the best opportunity of being successful? I'm going to take this US dollars and I'm buying Bitcoin. And that's the same mentality I had been trying to invest with since I was, in my early 20s, and my father's money. It's like 100 years from now, how do I know that this goes to who it's supposed to go to? And the average financial advisor does not advise based on that kind of time horizon, right? They're literally just looking at short-term 12-month to 12-month returns. And that was really what sparked the oh my gosh, this is a very, very legitimate asset, and I need to look at it much more closely. And so at the time, I still held some coins from 2015, and they were the best investment I'd ever made. And I realized that in hindsight, it was liquid the entire time, so I could sell it whenever I want. It was in a self-custody, so no one could take it from me. And it had performed better than everything else. You're like, well, holy shit, what is this thing? And I learned as an angel investor to look for something. It's basically trend analysis, but you don't necessarily want to invest in a startup when you only see it once. You want to meet the founders, see the business idea, and then 6 months from now or 12 months from now, you want to see them again, and you want to look at their progress. Have they signed up new customers? What's the product development been like? Have they got more team members? Have they progressed? And if you can draw two lines on a graph, or two dots, and those two dots show a very clear, fast progression rate, then that's actually an interesting company to invest into, because they're growing the fastest. And I realized that actually Bitcoin was the best representation of that I had. So double down, right? Like a poker hand, you've got a good hand, you double down. And I met Pete Dunworth at the end of 2020 when I was researching Unchained Capital and their multi-sig vault technology that they'd built. And I was looking for a safe and secure way to store large value of Bitcoin. Pete was the only financial advisor to this day that I've met that recommends Bitcoin to his clients. And I became a customer of his. So I paid 1% per year for him to hold the key, for me to hold the key, and for Unchained Capital to hold the key. And that gave me the peace of mind to sleep at night that if I got hit by a bus tomorrow, then my digital assets would pass to the person that I needed them to, which is my wife or my kids, or heaven forbid, my wife and I both got taken out by a meteorite or something, then my kids would get it. The amount of stories you hear of people that own digital assets on an iPhone that they lost, or a laptop that got thrown out, or whatever, and I mean that's a catastrophic failure of your inheritance plan. And of course, I'd inherited money, so I'd come very much from that world of like, okay, you have a will, you have to tell everyone where your money goes from the trust that gets created on your death, and so this just all made so much sense. Anyway, long story short, since 2020, I've then sold real estate, bought Bitcoin, used Pete's product to secure it properly in self-custody. And I've now gone into business with Pete to help him rebrand and become the Bitcoin advisor, and now really scale up the product that he's built. So myself and Andy Pattinson and Pete Dunworth are teammates for the Bitcoin advisor. We're seeing all sorts of interested people come out of the woodwork with 5, 10, 15, 20 Bitcoins that want to be sure, their wife doesn't give a shit, basically. They go, I've taught her how to do this. You show them once, that like the car crash is going to happen 10 years from now. So your wife has to remember 10 years from now how to access their Bitcoin and hope that they can find the passphrase if it then doesn't work. And there's just a number of steps that have to be taken that require a level of expertise that if someone doesn't have it, it's highly complicated. So the Bitcoin advisor is a manager of a key in a multi-sig setup, which means that it gives the customer peace of mind. So as an investor in Bitcoin, I can now have peace of mind at night that if something awful happened, my Bitcoin would go to my kids.
How is somebody, obviously you know Peter, so you trust Peter, but someone meeting Peter or the Bitcoin advisor for the first time, how do they get peace of mind that the Bitcoin advisor and Unchained Capital are not going to collude together and access those Bitcoin? What safeguards are in place?
Well, the first point I would make is if the Bitcoin advisor and Unchained were able to collude and chose to, we would overnight cannibalize our business. So it makes no sense from an incentive perspective to be corrupted in that way. But the most important point is it's not possible. Technically, it's not possible. So what would happen is, let's say, Sean, you wanted to become a customer. What we would do is coach you through setting up an Unchained account. Within your Unchained account, you would set up a multi-sig vault. That multi-sig vault would require 3 keys. One key would be held by Unchained, one key would be held by the Bitcoin advisor, and the third key would be held by you. To get into your Unchained account, there is 2-factor authentication. So only you have access to the 2-factor authentication. If I had the key at the Bitcoin advisor and Unchained had their key in the States, but we did not have 2-factor authentication, we cannot do anything with that account and with that Bitcoin. So it's technically impossible to collude and move the Bitcoin. In order to move it, if you so wished, you would set up a video call with the Bitcoin advisor, and you would use your 2FA to enter your Unchained account, and you would give us access at the same time. And we would both then have to sign off on a transaction to send the Bitcoin to whichever address you had decided to send it to. So in short, if the Bitcoin advisor was to go down or for some reason disappear, you could contact Unchained and you could move your Bitcoin, or you could replace the Bitcoin advisor's key using Unchained. If Unchained was to go down in a ball of flames and disappear, you could contact the Bitcoin advisor and we could replace the Unchained key. Or equally, heaven forbid, you were to disappear tomorrow and your will has a statement in it along the lines of contact the Bitcoin advisor in the case of my death, or your partner has information about who you've been doing your self-custody through, they would then contact the Bitcoin advisor and we would be able to give them access to your assets.
Cool. I guess the only other question that I have from there is what happens if I can no longer access my 2FA in that situation?
In that situation, you'd have to get in touch with Unchained Capital, and working with the Bitcoin advisor, we can renew the key that requires the 2FA. And so you would be able to switch the 2FA off using Unchained technology.
Okay, cool. Going back a little bit, this website you have, bitcoinwithjake.com, are you going to keep that resource there for everyone, or that's going to be wound down as well?
I don't know. And I haven't decided yet, basically. For now, it will stay up. There's no reason to not have it up there. But the entire focus of my content creation will go under the Bitcoin Advisor brand, and that will include a newsletter, that will include a podcast, that will include all the stuff I was doing before. So, yeah, I'll keep it up. Yeah, why not?
Unbelievable. You've done such an amazing job. How you've got, I think it's read, watch, listen, is it? And so there's the articles there. You can subscribe to your newsletter. You can watch YouTube videos. You can listen to podcasts there. I started going through the read. My wife was doing something, so I couldn't listen to anything. So I was just reading, and Jesse Crossius, amazing articles in there. Now, this is something I found very interesting, diving back into your personal life. You hold a lot of shares for a beer company that's 200 years old. Would you mind diving into that story? I think people might find that pretty fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. So my family business is called Hall & Woodhouse, and it was founded in 1777 by a man named Charles Hall. And Charles, he started selling cider from his apple farm in North Dorset to the British Army that were hosting troops on the south coast during the Napoleonic War with France. So a very, very, very long time ago, we started making booze as a family. His granddaughter married a Woodhouse, and so the company became called Hall & Woodhouse. And yeah, so we're a 240-year-old family business that I'm the 8th generation of the company. My father was the managing director when he died, and his younger brother became the managing director after him and is now chairman. We run a pub estate across the south of the UK where we sell our beer, and our beer is also sold in supermarkets across the UK and is exported to, I think, 15 countries around the world. So the main beer brand is called Badger, and we make traditional real ale.
You may need to come out with a sideline product called the Honey Badger for everyone in Bitcoin.
I agree. You can only buy it on Lightning Network.
Like when they started it, would that have been like bootleg or like moonshine beer? Like were they just making it in stills and selling it to the troops in the front, or is it already a professional operation that they had started as just at the time?
No, I mean, it would have been very, very farmhouse stuff. I mean, the local army camp would have been feeding them, well, I think that the real reason that ale started in the UK was the water system couldn't be trusted. And so when you mixed, obviously, largely what beer is water, right? You ferment it and you create alcohol. It's now clean. And so you can't get disease from beer. And actually, we would drink something called mead, or ale is then an evolution of that. So very, very low percentage alcohol, which the farm labourers, etc., would drink in the lunch and the midday during the harvest, etc. So no, I'm pretty sure it would have been as close to bootleg as you can get to begin with, to be honest. And then it professionalised over generations.
That's awesome. I reckon they should bring the mead back for lunch, and everyone would be a little bit less serious. And one thing that I've heard you say is sometimes when you talk to people, I don't think you use the word crazy, but they find it hard to listen when you start talking about Bitcoin. What have you found to be the most effective way to orange pill someone that has either never heard about it or has previously that's a scam?
Well, I mean, this is the big question we all have to answer, isn't it? But I personally feel that the most important thing to do is understand where someone's at. So what what problem do they need solving? And Bitcoin, it solves a lot of different problems. So to give an example, my position, I was in a Western nation trying to invest to secure, wealth for the future. That is a different problem solution proposition to someone who lives in a country in Africa, for example, or Southeast Asia, more of a developing nation in Central America, where their financial system just is non-existent. Right? They have huge, egregious payment fees from card processing companies. In some cases, they don't have internet access. The local fiat currency is inflated into oblivion. I've interviewed people from Venezuela, for example, and growing up in Caracas when the Bolivar it just disintegrated over the period of 15 years into hyperinflation, as we now know, and that proposition of sound money is very, very different to what I was looking at it for. So for me, it's really a case of, okay, who is this person? Where are they at? What problems do they have in their day-to-day life? Okay, let's home in on what I think the biggest problem is that Bitcoin can solve, and try and talk to them about the problem before I even mention Bitcoin.
It's sort of relative to what you're saying here. Probably the best soundbite that I've taken out of it, and I was looking for some amazing ones, and this is word for word from your mouth. And I quote, "If you don't understand inflation, you're fucked." Do you still stand by that?
Well, yes, I do. Oh, hey, bub. Let me answer your question, though. Ruby's just going to chill here. So, inflation is not obvious. And so, if you don't start researching what it actually is, then you are fucked. Particularly because the government will have you believe that CPI is real. And so they'll tell you that your money is disintegrating in value at official rates of 7% per year. But actually, when you look at what it costs to buy a property in a premium part of a decent city, it's going a lot faster than 7%. So you have to think for yourself, and you have to go, okay, well, what do I think the real rate of inflation actually is? And therefore, if my investment portfolio is not at least keeping pace with that, then I'm losing value year after year. And so financial advisors, they'll say to you, it's impossible to beat inflation. You say, well, what the fuck is the point using a financial advisor then? Because they're not doing their job. They're not protecting your purchasing power over time.
Yeah.
So you have to start thinking a bit differently. And I think that's where Bitcoin is so important, because it has the ability to protect your purchasing power over time. And it does not require you to have a financial advisor to buy it and to own it. And that's absolutely crucial.
Yeah. What do you think? Because the mainstream news, when they're talking about inflation, CPI, what's an easy way for them to start learning about inflation and sound money? Like, what are the baby steps somebody can take, or where we can guide them in a way?
Great question. Well, the first thing is just ask the right questions, and that takes you in an interesting direction. The Bitcoin Standard is just a brilliant book for looking into things like time preference, the history of money, the effect of fiat currency. Yeah, that says it all, to be honest. But the information's out there if you choose to look for it. So find people that you think you can trust their information from, and just start listening, reading, watching what they've got to say. And with time, you'll figure it out.
Cool. I guess with your new role with the Bitcoin Advisor, you guys are going to probably put out a whole lot of education and stuff. Do you already have a website for the Bitcoin Advisor?
Yeah, the bitcoinadvisor.com. Check it out. That gives a good update as to what our product is and what we can do for people. But absolutely, we're going to have a newsletter, we're going to have a podcast, and that will be pumped out across Apple, YouTube, Spotify, etc. And really, we've got an opportunity, in my opinion, to create world-class educational content as to why Bitcoin is an important part of anyone's portfolio, and really just live that truth, which is, came for the gains, but stayed for the revolution.
Actually, let's come back to what you said at the start. Bitcoin and crypto are so different.
So the way that Bitcoin is designed, it's completely different to the rest of crypto. And so when you start researching like why Bitcoin is the way it is, and how since its inception, it essentially hasn't changed, it's completely different to when you look into Ethereum and, what is decentralized? Well, the Bitcoin network is decentralized. You've got all these little node runners dotted all over the world that are able to run up a node in no time at all because they're small. And this is the bedrock of true decentralization, and you have to reach consensus. Ethereum's run by a small handful of people that are essentially using AWS on the back end, and Vitalik changes the rules when he feels like it. This is not, to me, the same asset class. It's completely different. And so a crypto token like Ethereum or Solana or any of the other names that you would have heard of, they essentially are, they're like buying equity in a startup. Highly risky, improbable outcomes, unreliable. Bitcoin is the complete opposite to all of those things. So they're just different asset classes completely, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. And even last week, Ethereum founder Vitalik Buterin saying that he doesn't stake very much Ethereum at all because he finds it too complicated. His words, which is pretty phenomenal. Like when we first find out about money happens as kids, obviously you're teaching rhyming with Bitcoin to Ruby now. Did you, for yourself, your journey, is that when the conversations around money started?
Since I was tiny, Sean. So you grow up with a family with a business. Every time you drive past the pub, is there anyone in the car park? Why isn't there anyone in the car park? Can we sell better beer? How do you build a better business? It's absolutely from day dot.
What would be the advice that you'd give to someone that was maybe in my situation that didn't have a family that talks about Bitcoin? What's just one simple action, but just something to start that conversation so they can grow together?
It's a wonderful idea. I don't think there's any one thing that I can think of other than the very broad answer, just educate yourself. So, if you look at my listen, read and watch tabs on Bitcoin with Jake, this is just my research into Bitcoin, and it's YouTube links, it's Spotify links, it's all free content that you can consume out there on the internet. So just be curious, find some sources that you think you can rely on, and generally that's people that have clearly done their own homework, and try to avoid a lack of incentive. So like, why is someone saying what they're saying? Just be sure that you can trust them, so to speak. And really that comes from their amount. If they've put a ton of work in for no reward, then they're clearly passionate about it, and they're likely to be telling you something that makes sense to them. Yeah, but we'll go downstairs in just a second. So just stay curious, educate yourself.
What parting gift as you transition to this new stage of life or message would you like to pass on?
Anyone can do it. So I decided to start a newsletter. I then decided to start a podcast, and out of that's become a wonderful business opportunity. It's proof that creating, let's say, a digital footprint, it's absolutely worth it. So much like what you're doing, Sean, just keep it up, and cool things come out of it.